Pyongyang in recent days has taken aggressive actions that are prompting much concerning speculation about its future intentions on the Korean peninsula. So is North Korea clamping for conflict? How concerned should we be about North Korea's claims of strategic cruise missiles? And what is being done to address growing regional tensions? Hello and welcome. It's Wednesday here in Korea and you're watching Issues and Insiders. Now today I have our panel of foreign journalists to address unrest on the Korean peninsula and more. For this, I have Andres Sanchez Braun here in the studio. Andres, welcome back.
Thank you for having us here.
I also have Sebastien Falletti with us. Sebastien, welcome back.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much.
Right. Andres, is North Korea done with diplomacy, so to speak, and clamping for conflict? What are the pundits that you've spoken to saying?
Well, that's actually a very good question, and a question that I think is going to keep us busy for the next, probably for the next months or for the full year, who knows. But after Kim Jong-un, said that South Korea is now his country's #1 enemy, that there is no chance for reconciliation, for reunification, etc., and all the weapons tests that have ensued, there seems to be two big diverging theories of what's going on or what North Korea's real strategy is here. One quite alarming one would be the one that is kind of like spearheaded by this article written by two very prestigious North Korea experts, two Americans, that is Bob Carlin and Dr. Siegfried Hecker, and they state that they think that Kim Jong-un has already decided on going to war, that he's all invested on it. And basically because what he's done since the failure of talks in 2019 is break away from what his father and his grandfather were trying to do, which is for the past 30 years, which is normalize ties with the U.S. And that, coupled with the fact that North Korea has grown much, much closer with Russia now, and the general global instability that we're seeing with many conflicts, and the U.S. really busy having to take care of many different issues here. Their opinion is that Kim Jong-un has already decided that the next step in this conflict or this situation in the peninsula is some sort of armed conflict. So a very worrying perspective, that is. On the other hand, you have experts saying that this is just North Korea's way sort of signaling, for example, that they're not really interested in, for example, South Korea in being a middleman when it comes to future talks with the U.S., for example, or that North Korea would just be ramping tensions on a U.S. presidential election year, which is something that North Korea has done many times in the past. And also with the possible perspective in the future that if Donald Trump wins the election in this case, some analysts say that Trump would already have a strategy ready that would, for example, contemplate giving North Korea security guarantees and at the same time letting it keep its nuclear weapons. So who knows? In my personal opinion, I wouldn't put all my money in any of these theories, because this is North Korea, and it's really hard to know what's going on in such an opaque country. But I do want to underline, I think, that some of Kim Jong-un's words and gestures have been quite meaningful. The fact, for example, that he started talking for the first time since the peninsula has been divided. This is the first time, I think, in the North that we've heard a North Korean leader talk about, sidelining unification for the first time. He's talking suddenly about, telling the North Koreans these people down south, don't think about them as sharing the same ethnicity or blood, etc., which is something that had been done always before. And it's quite illustrating to see that now North Korean news, for example, since Kim Jong-un's words, is now using only the northern half of the peninsula to portray the republic, right? So he's kind of creating this idea of otherness towards the south, which some people think it could be dangerous, especially after he said that, you know, in the case of a war, we should just literally attack the south and literally annex the territory. So that's concerning. Then he took very symbolical gestures, as in like demolishing that reunification monument. But also even more worrying, he said that he would actually destroy the train tracks of the Gyeonghui Line. The Gyeonghui Line is, you might remember back in the day, linked Seoul all the way to Sinuiju in the border with China. It's a project that the South has been pretty much invested on in the future. One day we'll be able to reconnect the south of the peninsula all the way to Europe. If Kim Jong-un goes ahead and destroys this train line, that would be extremely worrying. So in my opinion, we might as well keep an eye on satellite images for the next few weeks or months and see if there's anything going on the train lines, for example, and try to see if his intentions are real there.
Right, and staying with what Andres has just said, Sebastien, do tell us a bit more about the monument that was reportedly destroyed by North Korea, the monument that symbolizes reunification, of course.
Yeah, so this monument is basically sitting was sitting at the exit of Pyongyang on the highway that was going to Kaesong. And let's remember that this monument was built after a landmark intercurrent summit in the year 2000, which was extremely symbolic because it was a moment where the two Koreas, despite all the tension, were trying seriously to meet and talk together and find a potential compromise and potentially coexist or find a way to unify on a compromise base. And by destroying this monument, clearly North Korea wants to send a signal that he's serious about his words, because a couple of days before, as we mentioned before, North Korea announced that they will remove the reunification goal from the constitution, which is a very meaningful, of course, a move in terms of symbolic. And also they will declare South Korea as, quote, #1 most hostile country, which is extremely abrasive, clear and aggressive. So these are gestures which want to signal a break from the past. So clearly North Korea, Kim Jong-un is trying to say, we are entering a new era, we're entering a new chapter. So they want to say we have closed the chapter of intercurrent relation, not just the last military agreement of 2018, but more possibly since the early year 2000, when the two Koreas for 2 decades have been trying to mend the fence. So if that's true, that's a very significant shift, and that means we're entering into this year into a very, very choppy water, or new chapters. Does that mean that it leads immediately to more confrontation on the ground? That's the big question, because it might be a long cycle. And it also, there's one aspect, as Andres mentioned, we don't know exactly what are dynamics internally. To what extent he's using this for a domestic agenda too. Maybe he has his own reason to show to his own people that South Korea didn't play the game. So there are a lot of question marks, but clearly North Korea is sending signal that they are ready to be more aggressive, possibly more risk-taking. There's a lot of theory, like Andres said, two theories. Some people will tell you that this is North Korea is going for war. Some other you talk to, they tell you this is just business as usual before a US election. Probably the answer is in the middle. Most likely North Korea is ready to take more bolder action, and that's why everybody is staying put at the beginning of this year, because there's a lot of signal. And the question is, are we going to see something different this year? That's the real question. For now, we're seeing different soundbite. The question now is about action. Are we going to see some surprising action?
Right, and amid that question then, Andres, Russia for its part claims that South Korea, the US and Japan are preparing for war against North Korea. What is Russia basing its accusation on?
Well, yeah, this was Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov talking at this news conference at the UN and accusing the three countries of literally preparing for war against North Korea, basing it on the fact that he was saying that the three countries have been building up military capacity and that they've multiplied the number of military drills that they're conducting, which is true. I mean, we've seen since the failure of negotiations between North Korea and the U.S. in 2019, we've seen that the U.S. and South Korea have conducted way more combined military exercises. Of course, many of them in response also to an increasing number of weapon tests by the North. There's been more deployment of U.S. strategic assets on the peninsula too. And then, especially since 2022, since President Yoon got elected, Japan has been taking part increasingly in all these drills. For example, last year we saw for the first time the first ever air defense drills among the three countries, and we've been seeing more and more often the naval drills on a trilateral level. Actually, last week was the three countries conducted another anti-submarine exercise that had an American aircraft nuclear-powered carrier take part in. So, I mean, it's funny that Lavrov would actually say that the three countries are preparing for war with North Korea when we're getting the opposite message on the other side. Some experts saying that it's actually North Korea who's all in war already. And it's funny that Lavrov says it after what we know so far, that is that North Korea at least has given artillery and missiles to Russia for a war in Ukraine and whatnot. The rest we still don't know, but we might find out in the future. And who knows what Russia actually is going to transfer or has transferred already for North Korea in terms of this military agreement that was stricken by Kim Jong-un and Putin last September, right? All in all, I just think it just adds another layer of scariness on the potential outbreak of a war in the peninsula.
And further adding on to what Andres has just said, Sebastien, North Korea claims to have been testing new strategic cruise missiles in recent days. How worried do you suppose should we be?
Actually, they did, because it was confirmed by also the South Korean military, and they have been testing in the past few days both. They've tested a new cruise missile they have been testing since 2021. It's called Ulsan 1 and 2, and they tested on the west side, on the West Sea, and then on the East Sea. And almost at the same day, they tested also a submarine-launched cruise missile, Pulwalsan, which is presented as a new advance for the North Korean objective of building up a nuclear capable submarine fleet. So all these launch, of course, assert North Korea's determination to become a fully fledged nuclear state, in the sense that they want to have the full arsenal. So because cruise missiles are a complement to ballistic missiles. They are not under UN Security Council resolution, but of course, cruise missiles add something to the mix, because they are flying quite at a low altitude, and they are more maneuverable, so they are more challenging to be detected. So that adds some uncertainty to your opponent, meaning South Korea, or Japan, or the US. These new cruise missiles we're seeing are allegedly having a range of 1,500, 2,000 kilometers range. So basically, it's targeting South Korea and Japan. And this is a worrying part for Seoul, for South Korea, of course, in the light of what we just discussed before. In this context of escalating tension. And also, we know that these cruise missiles are capable of carrying tactical nuclear weapons. And we know that tactical nuclear weapons are one of the key priority that Kim Jong-un has been outlining since last year in 2023. And he said he wants to develop exponentially the nuclear arsenal. So by testing those missiles, North Korea is of course advancing its capability, but it's also signaling to his neighbor that is nuclear capable state, or at least he has a strategic capability on the long run. So there's both a technological dimension, but there's also a political message here that is very clear for everyone, including, I would say, China, including the US, which have to take into account this new development.
Right, and amidst these latest developments, Andres, this is an impromptu question, but speaking within your capacity as a journalist who has been covering these security concerns here on the peninsula, do you suppose more effort needs to be made to seek dialogue with North Korea?
Well, of course, I've always said that I'm a pro-engagement person in that sense. Dialogue will always be fundamental, and despite the fact that on the top levels, North Korea might not be talking to anyone other than Russia, apparently these days, there is the so-called 1.5 or 2.0 track dialogues, which has experts in different fields exchanging opinions and trying to warm up ties for potential government-to-government dialogue, and that's always ongoing, especially now that the pandemic seems to be over and restrictions in North Korea are over. I really hope that in that sense, North Korean members, for example, of academia or even business people start traveling around more and more, so that more of these people-to-people exchanges can take place, and we can find a way to reopen dialogue in in issues surrounding the peninsula. Then again, some people say that if Donald Trump comes back to power, there might be. I'm not sure personally that North Korea would actually be all into that option, because one very interesting theory is how painful it was for North Korea that things in Hanoi in 2019 didn't go as planned, and the fact that North Korea taking its leader all the way to a foreign country and sitting down with President Donald Trump, and him just walking out because he didn't like the conditions of actually. Many experts say that Pyongyang didn't take this very well, and this is one of the main reasons that Kim Jong-un would have actually decided, like, we're breaking away from this. We've done all that we've done for three decades, and there's no way to break in through. And then the North Korea is always thinking that it has to deal with things as we have to deal with democracies. There's always changing governments. There's changes in Congress. There's all sorts of things that you have to factor in, and that make these conversations very difficult for an autocracy. So still, let's just hope that there's some opening somewhere.
Right, of course, of course. We have a few minutes left, which is why Sebastien will focus on local issues here in South Korea. Now, beyond security concerns in the broader Korean peninsula, there's also been quite a bit of foreign media coverage about the political divide within members of the public here, and how it's resulting into, or leading to that is, acts of violence against politicians. What are your thoughts on this matter?
Well, clearly we know that there's this legislative election looming in April. The campaigning is starting, and of course the political debate is becoming even more entrenched. We've seen some worrying case of physical aggression in the past few days against one lawmaker from the ruling party, and earlier this month the leader of the opposition, Lee Jae-myung, was attacked in Busan. So these are of course quite spectacular acts that are quite worrying, and tells you about a very, very polarized political landscape. But this is not actually very new, because since the last presidential election, we know that the two candidates were neck to neck, and then President Yoon was elected with a very, very small margin, which means that this country is actually very much divided. So the polarization is a feature of today's South Korean politics. But then if you take the bigger picture about violence, unfortunately, if we look back, this is not exactly new, because we know that in the past there's been other aggression. We can remember the former President Park Geun-hye, before she was elected, was attacked also during a political rally. There's a lot of a story like that in modern Korean politics. So what's behind this, in my view, it tells also about a challenge of communication. It's very hard to have a proper debate. Here, of course, you feel the two opponents are just throwing at each other some slogan, but there's no real attempt to convince your opponent or the public. It's much more about stating in a very abrasive way your point of view, instead of trying to convince. And so behind this, I think that there's a culture here of confrontation instead of dialogue that has been long-standing. And this is maybe getting worse in the era of social media, where, of course, that accelerate the polarization of the debate, but also maybe make some people angry. We know that also social media have been a way to, in other countries, including in Europe, in France, we know there has been cases where people turn violent after having read or seen some video on social media, including went to some terrorist act, basically triggered by their consumption of those content. So there's probably here a mix. So there's some long-standing issue, but there's also some more recent issue that fuel further this kind of anger, and it's quite a worrying trend, because it could get worse in the future, and it would lead a lot of questions about security of political leaders, which in return makes it even more difficult to have a proper discussion with the political leader and have a serene debate.
Right, indeed, Sebastien, I'll have to agree. It's probably owing to a number of factors that need to be better addressed through dialogue, of course, as you mentioned earlier. Well, I'm afraid that's all the time we have for this session. Sebastien, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
And Andres, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you so much for having us here.
Well, that is all the time we have for this edition of Issues and Insiders. Thank you for watching. See you same time tomorrow, that is Thursday.